To find weird dinosaurs caught on camera, look no further than the 60s clay animation era. Movies like Dinosaurs had gecko-faced T-Rexes and wonky brontosauruses and were packed full of quirky and strange-looking dinosaurs. But while our understanding of what dinosaurs used to look like has rapidly evolved in the time between claymation and CGI, fossils are still being discovered with weird and wonderful appendages, lumps and protrusions that spark the imagination and keep their mystique intact. So, if you want anatomically accurate quirky dinosaurs from the ancient animal kingdom, you've come to the right place. In this video, we've compiled some of the less popular B-movie species and taken a shot at what the dinosaurs really looked like and why, including a dinosaur with a very camel-like adaptation. But first, let's start with a punk rocker from Patagonia. Clubs and spikes were certainly common among many dinosaur lineages, but given the sheer size of sauropods, it's no surprise these behemoths mostly didn't bother with weaponry. But there are some exceptions, and the Bahadosaurus is likely one of them. This early Cretaceous, short-necked sauropod, known from a single fossil described as Bahadosaurus pronuspinax, was the size of an Asian elephant. Small for a sauropod, and perhaps it was this diminutive stature that led to its characteristic mohawk-like spines. The single fossil only contains the head, the first two vertebrae, and what's thought to be the fifth neck vertebra. This is a small but significant sample, as the vertebrae appear to come with a pair of elongated and forward-pointing spines that may have run down the full back of the animal. They're thought to be members of the sister taxon of diplodocids, the Dicraeosaurids, a family known for their spiny necks. So they're not the first of their kind discovered, but they are perhaps the strangest. Unlike their known relatives, whose spines tend to aim down their backs, Bahadosaurus points its formidable prongs forward, as if daring a predator to have a go. But it's not known whether this was a defensive adaptation, or even whether the spines were visible at all. They may have been covered in a sail, and used to show off to the opposite sex, or as a way of regulating body temperature. So far, there's still plenty more unknown than there is known about this species, but early artistic impressions certainly depict it as a bizarre-looking sauropod. At the other end of the Cretaceous period, and on the other side of the planet, what is now Mongolia was home to a huge dinosaur with terrible hands, giving it its name, Deinocheirus. This was a theropod, a member of the hollow-boned dinosaurs that would survive the Cretaceous extinction event. And like their contemporary relatives, they had feathers. But feathers were commonplace by the Cretaceous. What really stood out about this animal were its claws. Here was essentially a 4-metre, 6.5-ton fluffy humped ostrich with the longest arms of any bipedal dinosaur. These long clawed arms were around 2.5 metres in length and matched in their quirkiness by a series of spinous processes, or neural spines, that gave the dinosaur a ridged back, a sail much like the one found on the back of the more familiar Spinosaurus. And like Spinosaurus, this was thought to have been an aquatic or semi-aquatic piscivore, as evidenced by fish scales and gastroliths found in the belly of one of the Deinocheirus fossils. But unlike the terrifying maw of Spinosaurus, Deinocheirus had a wide, flattened beak and is thought to have been omnivorous. In semi-aquatic environments, the large feet could have prevented it from sinking into mud, and the enormous arms would have been excellent at manipulating fallen trees and other swamp flora, and perhaps dredging up roots to eat. It also seems to have had a tail fan, which may have been used for sexual displays as seen in the rear end of peacocks and lyrebirds. If the tail was used to show off, it definitely would have had a lot of competition from our next dinosaur, who really raised the bar for late Cretaceous fashion. Aside from being a contender for one of the coolest dinosaur names, Cosmoceratops was oozing style. As you might have guessed, this was a relative of the colossal herbivore Triceratops, but just over 1/10 of its mass. What this little guy lacked in weight, it made up for in looks. Not content with the boring and predictable bony frill of its family members, Cosmoceratops went with a scroffier crown, the top of which was made up of 10 spines. 2 stuck outwards, and the middle 8 folded back over the drape towards the nose. This dinosaur had a total of 15 horns on its face, making its skull the best adorned of any known dinosaur species. Their purpose isn't yet clear, but as with most freaky adaptations like it, it was possibly a combination of display and protection. The name reflects the ostentatious nature of the skull, with cosmos coming from the Greek for ornamental. Depictions of this animal come in many different colours and patterns, all of which are imaginary, until scientists are lucky enough to tease out some pigment one day, but it's almost impossible to imagine Cosmoceratops with anything less than a dazzling colour scheme. The Cosmoceratops head garb is an example of a species making the most out of an adaptation that's already there. As animals evolve defences, these defences can imply their fitness as a mate, and as potential mates start looking out for certain characteristics with this in mind, they evolve into intricate and complex adornments that branch out from their root purpose. Another great example of this is the crown of thorns that some of the most notorious headbangers developed. Stygimoloch is a possibly defunct genus of Pachycephalosaur, which is the family of bone-headed dinosaurs thought to collide with one another headfirst on purpose. We infer this sheep-like behaviour from the bones in their tremendous skulls. The Pachycephalosaur cranium could be up to 25 centimetres thick, and, like the ceratopsians, these would have diverged over time to include visually impressive ornaments as well. This family contained some of the most mythical looking dinosaur skulls you can get, including the Dragon King Draco Rex, whose skull looks more like a prop out of Game of Thrones than an animal that truly existed. But exist they did, and Stygimoloch sported some of the largest and most fearsome head spines of the whole group. These would have been bipedal herbivores, but they were far from gentle, and would have certainly experienced violent tendencies towards each other, and you can only imagine the sound of two of these heads butting together at full speed. Sadly, the thick skulls weren't powerful enough to withstand the big old rock that came down at the end of the Cretaceous, and these were some of the last non-avian dinosaurs to exist on Earth. The taxonomy of both Stygimoloch and Draco Rex is questionable, and they may have all been members of the same genus of Pachycephalosaurus, but regardless of where they sat in their family tree, they were definitely impressive individuals. Moving from funky skull caps to awful teeth, there are plenty of reasons why you wouldn't want to kiss this next dinosaur, but before we get to that, just a quick reminder that if you're enjoying this video, please consider giving it a like, and subscribing to let us know that you're enjoying the content. Now for our next freaky dino. Sharing the end of the Cretaceous with Stygimoloch would have been a small and unassuming genus of carnivores known as Masiacosaurus. These bipedal predators look pretty standard as far as theropods go, but for one quirky feature: really goofy teeth. With dentition that curved outwards from the jaw, this gave them a sort of dueling banjos appearance from the front. But rather than being the deleterious product of generations of incestuous marriage, these were actually a highly specialised adaptation to their diet. As well as poking out at an odd angle, the teeth themselves are also a strange shape, being spoon-like with hooked edges and blades, and there's still debate around what they would have been good for, but small wriggly animals like fish could be a good guess, as lots of contemporary piscivores have similarly messy mouths. Having such thick skulls and wonky dentition, you'd expect some of these dinosaurs to get the hump, but as it happens, it's our final entry that went the way of the camel. Most, if not all of these dinosaurs are keeping their secrets well. Given that complete fossils are incredibly rare, a lot is left up to interpretation when it comes to how these weird bones would have looked when draped in muscle, fat and skin. And so we come to perhaps the most mysterious species on our list. This was a dinosaur that is often depicted carrying a camel's hump, but the truth is, the spinal protrusions from the fossil of Concavinator are still something we don't know all that much about. Concavinator was a member of one of the most terrifying families of theropods that contained the 12-metre monster Carcharodontosaurus. But this 4-metre dino didn't have the advantage of size, which may explain why it went with such a strange body type. Just in front of the hips are a set of spinal protrusions that indicate some kind of crest or hump. Most depictions have this animal wandering around with either a single or a double crest, sometimes with the two joined together to make a sail, and some of the newer depictions lean on some very sparse fossil evidence of quills on its arms, which could suggest that it had feathers. Despite the species description coming from a near-complete fossil, there's still a dearth of data available to use when it comes to guessing what the hump was for, or even what it was made of. Future generations may well ridicule current depictions of this species in the face of much more accurate assumptions, just like we do with claymation movies from the 60s. Meanwhile, that leaves them entirely open to interpretation, which is part of the fun. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.